All right, so we are now being recorded and I will begin my presentation. So welcome to our second video teleconference for BIOL 105YC. Okay, so now that you are in your small groups, my question first to you now will be how are you in your group? So, in order to save time in the sharing, maybe we can stick to one person who will be representing the group and update all of us on how are you doing in your group with the assigned discussion and other stuff. Okay, are there any volunteers first? Volunteers? All right, I'll call a group. Okay, so from group A, Mr. Coruña, how are you in your group?
Oh, hello, sir.
Yes.
Yes, in our group we're doing good so far, and then we have already posted our discussions in the forum, sir. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you for sharing. Okay, next, from group G, may I ask a representative from group G? There are two who are in attendance right now. All right, okay.
Hello, sir. Good morning,
Yes,
everyone.
proceed. Good morning. Please continue. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Hi, okay. Hello, sir. Hello, everyone. So far, so good naman, sir. Everybody is cooperating and doing their part, said sir.
All right, that's good to know. Thank you from Group G. Again, I've mentioned this in the other sections as well, that in the groups, there are no particular leaders assigned. Okay, I did not assign leaders because I just want you to decide for yourselves um, who would initiate on a particular task. So meaning to say anyone can just initiate. Okay, so for example, someone in the group will say, okay, can we divide the task into this? And then yours will be this. So something that's organic, okay, and natural. So I also encourage you, because there are around 3 members per group, to sort of um, change sort of leadership in every activity so that you will have the opportunity to lead the group as well. Okay, so thank you from Group G. Next, from Group B, si MJ. Hi MJ, how are you in Group B? Wala si basig dili siya makakuan. Maybe MJ cannot use her audio. Okay, we'll skip muna Group B. Let's go to Group F. So we have Ameralia. How are you in Group F?
I'm fine. I'm doing well. Our group is doing well. We're cooperating with each other, and we also finished the group discussion forum in time. We're comfortable with each other because we've known each other since last year. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, that's good to know from Group F. Thank you for the update. All right. Is Group B ready? CMJ?
I think disconnected
Na-disconnect.
siya, sir.
I didn't see the ano kasi, notification. Anyway, what about from Group C? Any representative from Group C to update us on how they are doing?
Hello, sir. We're good, sir. We divided the task very well, sir, and we passed it on time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the update, Group C. Next, from Group D. So I think we have one member, si Christopher.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
We are doing fine, sir, sa among group. Then we finished the group discussion on time, said sir, and we are communicating very well, and everyone is cooperating.
All right. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Next, are there any members from Group E? Si Miss Baculio, Mr. Ladon, and Miss Manios. I don't think there are any. So I think all groups who are present right now, represented right now, have shared on how they are doing. Okay, so just a sort of background on the group discussion. Um, the group discussion is designed for you to really sort of meticulously reread back on the chapter and share on certain more detailed points about the answer to the question. Okay, because later on there will also be a quiz that's individual, going to be taken individually. Okay, which is also which also contains some of the questions and topics from the group discussion. All right, so thank you for sharing. So here's our schedule. Just an update, we are now on January 9, and we are doing currently our video teleconference. Next week will be the prelims week, okay? And you have an exam next week for this subject. And there's also a quiz, which I will announce later the schedules of, okay? So the coverage for the prelim exam is only up to chapter 2. We will not include chapter 3 because I think I overestimated. No, the holidays have been quite relaxing, perhaps for all of us. So I have decided to leave chapter 3 for the next leg of exams. All right. So let me proceed now with our main discussion, and that's chapter 1. This was the reading assignment. But today we are going to talk about certain portions of chapter 1, starting with what this picture is showing. Can anyone in the group tell us what is shown here? Anyone? What are these things? Or are there two things here, or just one thing?
Sir,
Yes,
may I con?
proceed.
Um, this is it seems to be a cell undergoing cytokinesis, sir.
All right. Yeah, that's very specific, and that's correct. Okay, this cell is currently undergoing cytokinesis. It's doing cell division, and it's about to finish it. So there are now two daughter cells that we see here. These are prokaryotic cells. If you can see on based on the shape and the structure. So you can see on the inside there are nucleoid regions, but there seems to be a lack of organelles from the inside. So we know that all cells come from cells, and they do that through cell division. So that statement, though, is just a portion of the cell theory, the modern cell theory. So can anyone from the group, okay, just speak right away, remind all of us what the three statements of the modern cell theory are? The modern cell theory, that's what we hold on to, okay? Everyone should be able to be familiar with that because that's the main topic of our course. Okay, so anyone share to us maybe a statement, if not all three, one statement of the modern cell theory.
Go on, sir. Cells are the basic structural units of life, and that they divide in order to pass on traits or heredity, sir.
All right. And I think you hit 2 points there. Number one, cells are the basic unit of life. Number two, cells come from cells, and they do that through cell division, and they inherit the genetic material through cell division. And of course, the third one is that all living things, whether unicellular or multicellular, are made of cells. Okay, and these statements were contributed by three scientists. So the first two were Schleiden and then Schwann. Okay, and then later on, the statement on cells come from cells was added by Rudolf Virchow. All right, so as opposed to spontaneous generation, no. Okay, so here's a sort of something to tickle your minds and in this very early part of the morning. If I'm gonna ask you, no, okay, no wrong answer here. What additional statement will you add to the three statements of the modern cell theory? If you can add just one more statement, what would that statement be? Okay. So the floor is open for anyone to share. So first, we know that cells come from cells. Second, all living things are made of cells. Third, the cell is the basic unit of life. I'm asking for a fourth statement. Do you think you can sort of devise a fourth statement for that? Just try. No wrong answers. Nothing? Sige.
Sir, if I may, cells, maybe it would say cells require energy, and that energy can also be passed on, perhaps. That's all, sir. Thank you.
Cells, which are the basic unit of life, require energy, or life requires energy. Okay, so that's the main statement that you shared, and that's correct. Okay, all forms of life require energy. Okay, but I think what you meant by passed on is that the energy can be converted into another form. Okay, and
Yes, sir.
that's also true. Okay, but not in a way that genetic information is passed on to another to a descendant, for example. Okay, so that's correct. Okay, all forms of life which are made of cells use energy or require energy. Does anyone have another statement that he or she might want to add to the three original statements of the cell theory? there was an interesting statement that a student shared to me in my previous meeting with another group as well. And I will share it to you after you've shared yours. Okay. More statements from the group about cells in general. Going once.
Try lang, sir.
All right.
Um, all cells contain genetic material. Like,
All cells contain genetic material. Okay. Yes, I think that's almost universal, what you're saying. No, they have DNA as a genetic material. But I challenge um, those who are listening right now, is there something wrong with that statement? I mean, the concept is correct. All cells contain genetic material, which is DNA. But I'm challenging the group. Can you think of something that would make that statement sort of not so universal? Meaning to say there's an exception. Is there an exception? All cells contain genetic material. Wala? Okay, so perhaps we can accept that one. Okay, so since no one objects or suggests an exception, then we will accept it. Okay, so let me share to you what one of the members from another group said. The student said that all cells will die, which is correct. Okay, all cells will die eventually. So only living things which are composed of cells will die. Non-living things cannot die. Right, so thank you. I hope your minds are a bit tickled right now and ready for the next presentations. Okay, so I think we need to recall the hierarchical levels that are important now in studying biology. So first, recall that the Earth is the only planet in the universe that's known to contain life. And the life layers on Earth, is known as the biosphere. And in this biosphere, it's divided into large portions of unique climates and living thing composition. We call those biomes. Like, for example, the tropical rainforest is a biome. And within a biome, you can find countless of ecosystems. Now, an ecosystem is composed of the living things and the area, the non-living area or environment that they are on. Okay, that's the ecosystem. And then the ecosystem, of course, you can remove the living things alone and you have the community. The community is composed of organisms of different species. And if you only choose an organism of a particular type of species, you have a population. And if you choose one member of the population, you have the individual, just like the plant that we have here on this picture. Okay? And this individual is composed of organs. So for example, the leaf is a plant organ. And the organ is composed of organized tissues. For example, there is an epidermal tissue on the leaf. There's a ground tissue. There's also vascular tissue, if you can recall your botany. All right? And we know that tissues are made of cells. The main topic of our course, cells. Okay? And then cells have organelles, particularly eukaryotic cells. So here we have the chloroplast inside the plant cell. And if we dismantle the components of the chloroplast into its more detailed parts, we can see that it's made of molecules, and then molecules are made of atoms. So you see, the cell is not the smallest structure of life. Okay, it's not. It's somewhere in the middle. So my next question for the group now is this. If the cell is not the smallest structure of life, why is it considered as the basic structure of life?
May I try, sir?
Sure.
um, for me, I think the reason cell is considered to be the basic structure of life because cells make up tissues, sir, and eventually to us living things. And cells are there are also cells, sir, like sa meiosis, sir, that are that are capable to answer make new like in our terms, sir, babies.
And all right. All right, thank you. So I think your point there is that cells make up tissues and tissues make up us, organisms. No, so which are living things, and non-living things don't have these tissues and therefore do not have cells. Okay, you have a point. Is there anyone else who want to add to the reason why the cell is the basic unit of life? But that's correct. That answer was correct.
Okay. Ah, sige.
You want to add something?
For me lang, sir, I think it's because cells can only be found in the living things. Basically, atoms and molecules can also be found on the non-living things, so they cannot be technically considered to be as the basic structure of life.
Yes, all right. That's the most obvious reason. Although everything is made of matter and have atoms and molecules, only living things have cells. Okay, that's true. Okay. Anyone else would like to solicit an idea why the cell is the basic structure of life?
Um, I believe that cells are the kind of basic structure of life because they are the ones simplest form bitaw simplest nga unit that exhibit the properties that can only be found in living things. For example, they it's a system, it's a working system. Even if you take a cell away from like, a living thing, it can still survive for a certain period of time. And um if I know that there are building blocks of living things that are smaller than cells. For example, like maybe organelles or molecule organelles. But if you take an organelle out of a cell, it will not survive. But as for the cell, if you take it out of a person's body, it can survive at least for a short amount of time. That's why
Okay.
they're
Yes, that's the more detailed version of the answer. Okay, so I think the answer so far is the first answer was that um, cells are only found in living things. Okay, and this answer somehow clarifies that one. Why are cells only found in living things? Because they are the smallest structures of life that exhibit the characteristics of life. So they exhibit reproduction, they can reproduce, they use energy in order to survive, they react to stimuli from their environment. What else? All characteristics of life, they grow, okay? They reproduce. So all of these characteristics, all characteristics that you can use to describe living things, you can use to describe a cell. So that's why the cell is the basic unit of life. Okay, so thank you very much for your answers. So speaking of cells, we can actually use cells as a classification of living things. So for example, we may classify a living thing based on the cell type that it has, whether it's eukaryotic, because it contains eukaryotic cells as shown here on the left, or prokaryotic because it contains prokaryotic cells, as shown here on the right. Okay, so all these cells are different in terms of their structures. Okay, and one obvious difference is the presence of the nucleus, which houses the genetic material in eukaryotic cells. So in prokaryotic cells, they only have their DNA floating about in a region that's not separated from the cytoplasm. We call the nucleoid region. So that's one difference, no? And another obvious difference based on the pictures here are the sizes. The average size of eukaryotic cells is considerably larger than that of prokaryotic cells. So those are differences, but are there similarities? Can anyone in the group tell us some of the similarities between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells? How are they similar? And we are talking about structural similarity here, okay? Structural.
I- They both have plasma membranes or cell membranes, and they both have genetic material.
Yes, exactly. Okay. The plasma membrane is the boundary of life, so we can call it that way. So it keeps the environment separate from the internal environment of the cell. So all cells have the cell membrane. Okay. And cells also need genetic material. No, but there are certain cells at maturity that have missing DNAs or nuclei. For example, the red blood cell of humans do not have genetic material anymore. Okay, so that's the exception actually to the statement given a while ago. Red blood cells of humans don't have genetic material. But universally, all cells, whether eukaryotic or prokaryotic, at some point in their existence, have genetic material in the form of DNA. That's one. Those are two similarities. Okay, and I forgot to mention another difference is that eukaryotic cells have organelles that are membranous, meaning to say they are sort of like compartments inside the cell that separate certain portions of the cell from the cytoplasm. Another similarity is necessary because both cells need to make their own proteins. Can anyone in the group tell us what I'm talking about? Which structure makes proteins? Which organelles manufacture proteins?
Ribosome, sir.
The ribosome. So ribosomes make proteins, and both eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells need proteins. So both of them must have ribosomes. Okay, so those are the similarities: genetic material, cell membrane, and then the cytoplasm, of course, is common, and then the ribosomes. All right. So this is actually a sort of representative of the age of the Earth and showing the arrival of the different forms of life. We believe that the first forms of life were similar to the modern prokaryotic cells. They didn't have nuclei nor organelles. Okay, Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago. Life came around 3.8 billion years ago. And the first forms of life were sort of anaerobic. They didn't manufacture oxygen. But then at some point in the um, uh, early parts of the existence of life, there were cells that produced oxygen as a waste product. And oxygen was a poison to a majority of the organisms then. So only those that were able to tolerate oxygen survived. Okay? And those that hid away from oxygen also survived. So nowadays, we know that there are organisms that cannot live without oxygen, which was once a toxin or a poison. And then there are also organisms that we know of right now that die when they are exposed to oxygen. Okay? So eukaryotes came very much later, almost halfway in the timeline of life. So here is another view of that. This is the sort of a tree of life. And we know that the main ancestor for both eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells is the LUCA. Can anyone in the group tell us what LUCA stands for?
If I may, sir.
Yes, please.
If I remember, I think it means last universal common ancestor.
Yes, that's correct. So the LUCA is what we believe as the cell that was the ancestor for both eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. And it was more similar in structure to the prokaryotic cells. So after the LUCA, there was a diversifying of cell types. Okay, one moved to the right, which are the bacteria. We have domain bacteria. And one moved towards the left in this illustration, and we have the domain eukarya and domain archaea. And then there's another branching point. Okay, another group moved to the right, which are the domain archaea, and another group moved to the left, which are now what we call as the eukarya. Okay, and the beginning of the arrival of the eukaryotes, there is this type of cell or cell we call now as FICA. Can anyone in the group tell us what FICA stands for?
First eukaryotic cellular ancestor.
All right, so this is the first eukaryotic cellular ancestor. Meaning to say it's the first ever eukaryotic-like cell that we believe existed. Okay, and then this evolved in time of millions of years or even billions of years. Okay, and then we arrive at the LECA. What does LECA stand for?
Last eukaryotic common ancestor, sir.
Okay, last eukaryotic common ancestor. So this one is the cell or the ancestral cell that we believe that closely resembles the modern eukaryotic cells. Okay, so this is just sort of a family tree of the cells, and then showing also the ancestors of the modern eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells that we have right now. So another way to classify life is whether they are unicellular or multicellular. Okay, so here we have bacteria, bacilli bacteria. So these types of bacteria are strictly unicellular, but they can exist in colonies, as shown here on the picture on the left. Okay, but if ever you take one of the cell away from the others, it will still survive. It will continue to divide, and it will become two new cells, and then 4 new cells, and then so on. Okay, so these are unicellular forms of life. So an example will be this type of bacteria, bacilli. Then here we have another type of bacteria. These are actually cyanobacteria. Okay, they are photosynthetic, and you might be tempted to say that one strand, the one that looks like a necklace, is one cell, but that's a mistake. Okay, The necklace-like strand is actually made of several cells. The beads are the cells. Okay? But for cyanobacteria, the cells need to be part of the colony, the bead, in order to survive. Okay? So for example, here we have certain cells that are quite large. The circular oblong-shaped cells that are large are actually the nitrogen fixing cells. They fix the nitrogen from the air into nitrates so that the cyanobacteria can use it. And then the smaller cells in the beads are the photosynthetic cells. They produce starch, food for the cyanobacteria. So together, these two types of cells cooperate. They have different tasks. So, however, if one of these cells are removed from the colony, they will still survive. Okay? But it's important for them, it's better for them to live together in a colony and do different tasks, partition the tasks. So you can see the difference between this type of bacteria and this. Here, we sort of have a community already of cells, okay, that need to be together in order to survive better. In fact, I have here an example of a cellular slime mold, okay? This slime mold actually starts its life as an amoeba. An amoeba is a single-celled organism, number one. Okay, so they live separately, but when times or when the environment gets hostile, okay, they need to survive, and they do that by huddling together. They aggregate together, as you can see in number 2. And then when they aggregate together, they move together into another environment where the living condition is better. As you can see in number 3, we call this a slug. So they move like a slug. And then they form a fruiting body, sort of like a fungus, as you can see in numbers 4 and 5. And then they produce a spores, and the spores are released into the environment and land onto moist surfaces in number 6. And then the spores sort of hatch and give rise to new amoeba cells. So this is quite an interesting way of life for living things, because this type of organism can live both as unicellular and multicellular at the same time. So here is time-lapse photo of that. So you can see the amoeba cells aggregating together when they were stimulated with food, okay? So they can be unicellular, but when needed be, they can be multicellular. And that's not unique to the slime mold. Even certain types of animals like sponges, okay, are composed of semi-independent cells. Meaning to say, if you disintegrate a sponge, if you separate the cells of the sponge from each other and leave them there in the Petri plate, they will eventually find themselves crawling or moving back and aggregating together, as you can see in this time-lapse photo. So there are certain organisms in our biosphere that can live or survive as unicellular organisms, but then later on, those cells come together and form a multicellular organism. For us humans, we cannot do that. We are strictly multicellular. Okay? What does that mean? Meaning to say, if you remove one of our cells away from our body, away from the tissue, it will not survive long by itself. Okay? So that's why we now have permanent tissues, just like the one shown here. We have here loose connective tissue. Okay? Here we have fibrous connective tissue, such as the ones in the tendons. And you can see the cells, okay, in the tissue. Here we have bone on the left and adipose or fat tissue on the right. And here we have cartilage. And here we have blood. Okay, so if you separate one of these cells from the tissue, it will not survive long away from the tissue. So therefore, there are organisms that are strictly multicellular. And then these are our model organisms when we study cells. Okay, can anyone tell us, okay, what these organisms are from upper left to lower right?
Sir, maybe sa kaning upper left kay paramecium, I believe. Is it?
The one on the upper left is a model organism for prokaryotes.
Oh
So
yeah,
it's a,
prokaryotes. And uh, the one on the lower left, maybe a model organism for parasites or
mhm,
mga flatworms, sir.
all right.
And of course, the one on the lower right is a model organism for mammals.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Uh,
Reward
continue.
the faith that pleases
the
God,
one on the upper right is
that God
model organism for
that He will
plants,
reward those
Yes.
and the one on
difficult times come and
the one on the
circumstances.
middle,
We
upper
must
middle
choose to believe
is
that God will turn things around and reward us. Hebrews
I believe for
10,
fungi.
verse 6.
All right. You're
Okay,
correct.
But
and the one on the lower,
kung basahan ng verse,
actually I don't really
but
know,
without
on the
faith,
middle
no one
lower.
can please God.
Right. Thank you for your answers. Does anyone want to add maybe the specific scientific names of these organisms?
Sir, in the lower, sir, yung nasa left, lower, yung pinaka left, sir, I think that's C. elegans, am I right?
Yes,
At
that's correct.
yung nasa middle is Drosophila, I forgot the other, yung kuan niya, sumpay. And the right was mice. I think as what I've known, these three, they're, kasi the scientists have answered that their genes are connected to humans. That's why they are used as model organism. Nakalimot ko na sa taas, sir. Nga unsa siya nga plants. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the additional information. Anyone else would like to identify the organisms on top at the top portion?
Sir,
Yes.
um, I think this one in the top left is the E. coli.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and the middle one, the Baker's yeast. I think I forgot the scientific name of that one, sir.
That's also correct. This is yeast.
And yeah, Baker's yeast or the and then this third one on the left would be the pale crest or the weed that was that is related to something mustard and the cabbage plants, but I don't remember also the scientific names.
Yeah, you are correct. It's related to the mustard plants. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay. These are the model organisms because we cannot study all forms of life to study cells. So we just choose certain representatives. And these are the ones that are easier to grow in the laboratory and maintain in the laboratory. Okay, so again, let me enumerate what they are from the top, from top left. That's E. coli, no, Escherichia coli, for model organism for prokaryotes. The one in the middle is Baker's yeast or Saccharomyces cerevisiae, model organism for unicellular eukaryotes. So that's where we study mitosis and mitosis. Okay, the process of mitosis from yeast cells. And the representative for plants is Arabidopsis thaliana. Okay. And at the bottom, from the left, we have the nematode, Caenorhabditis elegans. We use this to study cell lineage, like how does one cell become many cells in an organism. The one in the middle is Drosophila melanogaster, and we use this to study mutations. And the one on the right is Mus musculus, the mouse. And if you notice, the mouse doesn't have hair. It seems to be abnormal. It was bred that way. It actually lacks the organ thymus Okay, walang thymus ang mouse na yan. Because thymus is very important in the manufacture of immune cells in our bodies, like the T cells. Thymus, no? So the mouse lacks immune cells. Therefore, it's easy for scientists to inject foreign cells into the mouse, and they can use the mouse as a study material, a lab mouse. Okay, so no allergic reactions because it lacks immune cells. So our study of cells has brought us to the knowledge of the presence of stem cells. So I will just go fast here. There are two types that concerns us humans. We have the ones in the adults. We have the adult stem cell. And then in the embryo, in the inner cell mass of the embryo, we have the embryonic stem cells. The adult stem cells include the ones that form the blood, the hematopoietic stem cells, and the ones that are found in our connective tissues, the mesenchymic stem cells. Bad news for those who are, some of you might be find this as bad news. You can actually make new fat cells in your body out of non-fat cells. And thanks to the mesenchymic stem cells, okay? You can just make new fat cells out of non-fat cells. So adult stem cells are what we call as multipotent, meaning to say they can become many types of cells later on. Okay? There are also some that are unipotent, meaning to say they are destined to become one type of cell later on. But embryonic stem cells are very important because they are pluripotent, and we can use them to produce many types of cells in the human body. So for example, if you need a liver transplant, we can just make new liver cells and new liver tissue using embryonic stem cells. And of course, the most potent of all is the egg cell, no, from the female. We call it totipotent. It's the only totipotent cell, the egg cell. And this is the method on how embryonic stem cells are used. I will not elaborate on this anymore. Okay? And we can even stimulate certain differentiated cells to become pluripotent again. So we stimulate them in the laboratory, and we will be calling them induced pluripotent stem cells. Okay? This is found in your book as well. So when we study cells, there is this method called reductionism, okay? Meaning to say, when you want to study cells, you might want to study its parts separately, okay? And that's what many scientists have been doing. In fact, it's the easiest way to study cells. Study their parts separately. That's reductionism. However, when we remove the part from the whole cell, it behaves differently than when it was in the cell. So that's sort of the disadvantage of reductionism, because you have to tinker, you have to separate parts, and in the process, those parts are not acting as they were when they were still part of the cell. Okay? So as an alternative to reductionism, scientists may also use in vivo. In vivo meaning in life, meaning to say we are studying cells as they are, and the organelles as they are in the cell. So that's in vivo. Okay? You can also view reductionism as in vitro under glass, because you remove the cell from the tissue. Okay? So these are the two ways in which you may want to approach in the study of cells. And of course, Chapter 2 was discussed to you in the form of recorded videos that I've uploaded, and I hope you viewed them. And as you've updated a while ago, you've answered the questions here. I will not discuss this today, okay? So instead, let me just remind you about group discussions. Okay, I've already viewed some of the discussions, and I noticed that there were certain groups that took illustrations from the net and then uploaded them as their answer. I would like to tell you all that I would prefer that you type your discussion as your own words instead of lifting materials from the internet and making it your answer. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that because you cited your sources, so there's nothing wrong. But I prefer to really be able to read your own words. Okay, and you may also cite sources. So in the next discussion, second one, please avoid lifting tables or illustrations from the internet for your answers. Instead, type your answers right away. And then there is a quiz, upcoming quiz. For the other sections, it's supposed to be today. It was today. But for your section, because we just had this video teleconference now, this quiz will be on January 11. Okay, it will be open from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. So I hope you can find time to do the quiz. It's a short quiz, and the coverage will be chapters 1 and 2. And our prelim exam will be on January 14. Okay, next week is the prelim week. The coverage will be chapters 1 and 2. And the questions will be multiple choice, objective type, and there might be some essay questions as well. So with that, do you have any concerns or questions or clarifications? Any questions, concerns, clarifications? We are over time by 1 minute already. I'm sorry, no, a while ago I wasn't able to see the chats. There were some who answered through the chat box, but I wasn't able to see that because I was presenting. So I couldn't recognize you when you answer through the chat box. Are there any concerns, questions? Silence means none. So just be prepared for the quiz and for the exam. So the quiz and the exam have the same coverage, but the exam is, of course, longer. Minimum 50 items. Okay, so I guess there are no more questions. All right. So I'm sorry I had to rush through that last part of the presentation because we are over time na. So if there are no questions, guys, I really thank you for joining me in this video teleconference on this Saturday. And you can always reach me if you have questions through eLearn. You can post a message or through Messenger. And I will be posting the recording of this video teleconference later on our course wall. So you may also go back to it if you have clarifications. So I thank you guys for joining, and I hope you will have a productive day ahead and a blessed day ahead. And you are now all dismissed from this video teleconference. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Thank you,
sir.
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 Thank you, sir. Bye, sir.